Добрый день, дорогие телезрители! В эфире программа «Права и обязанности», ее ведущая Светлана Павленко. Сегодня вы услышите очень интересный материал, который пригодится в вашей жизни, я думаю. И цель нашей программы, чтобы помочь всем нам бороться с такими проблемами, о которых вы услышите в нашей программе. И у меня в гостях сегодня представители наших властей. Это офицер Наташа и также сержант Майкл. Really appreciate you here today with us on our program. We welcome you in Slavic Family. I just introduced you, and I don't know who wants to speak first right now, but I know the subject we're going to be talking today. It's very complicated for us to understand, and maybe you, Natasha, would like to start. Sure. Appreciate it.
Well, I would like to thank you for your time and invitation. And my name is Natаша Хаусенберg. I'm a Portland police officer assigned to the chief's office, and Sergeant Gaiger is also with the Portland police, and he actually commands and runs a unit called sex trafficking, which used to be vice unit, I believe, and now it's sex trafficking. So the reason why we also wanted to be here is to educate Russian-speaking public, our Slavic community, about this major global and local problem, not just from a criminal aspect, but from a public health aspect and family law as well. And we would like to educate and raise public awareness so that people can be able to identify and recognize potential victims of human trafficking or any similar suspicious behavior of that sort.
And I heard first time about sex trafficking, that was kind of shocking for me, because I thought, like, in America such things not even exist. Maybe a little bit here and there, but not here in Portland. So, and we're going to be talking about a little bit more, of course, but can you tell us a little bit what is sex trafficking? I mean, this is something new for us to understand.
Yeah, there's a term that I think a lot of people are familiar with. It's called human trafficking or child exploitation. But when we talk about trafficking, I don't think it's unusual that most people don't really understand what's been going on. One of the things that we're finding is that most people in the United States are only just now coming to be aware of the full extent of this problem. And so when we talk about human trafficking, what we mean by that is the exploitation of young women and children, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're being moved across international boundaries or even necessarily state boundaries. Well, what we mean is they are oftentimes exploited within our own communities. They are being forced into the sex trade, and they are being held against their will, and they are forced to engage in multiple acts of sexual conduct with adults. And then there are those who are forcing them into this, who are receiving the money for it and maintaining control over these young women.
How that affects our community, specifically here for our Slavic, Russian-speaking people. I understand that if you hear, then it's definitely you want to bring that awareness also for us.
You know, one of the things that I think when we're trying to evaluate the extent of the problem or who is most vulnerable, I think it's first a good idea to look at the demand side. When we talk about human trafficking or the exploitation of young women, one of the things we first examine is what is the extent of the demand? And when I say demand, I mean, is there a market for paid sex services with both underage children and young women in their 20s and 30s? And what I did is before I came on here, I just went on to one of the local escort pages that's a very prominent national escort page. It's called Backpage.com. And I simply printed off about 3 days worth of advertisements. And it is page after page of advertisement. Generally speaking, every day in the city of Portland alone, there are anywhere from 100 to 175 advertisements for prostitution services every single day just on one website. And one need only Google Portland Escort Services and you'll find an alarmingly large number of escort services that offer what can only be described as sexual services in exchange for money. And so the demand is enormous, and what I would say is wherever there is the internet, there will be the exploitation of young women and children. Because what it does is it provides anonymity and it fulfills the supply. and those things merge with the demand. So what we have is there is a large market for young women, and you simply need go onto the internet and call a telephone number, and they will even come to your hotel or to your home, and that is where this act is taking place.
But I thought escort services or such activities are illegal. How they possibly could be on internet so openly?
They are, but they're not as specific to say that this is a particular sex act that we're offering, although some do. But I think what they recognize is that most police agencies are not equipped to deal with every act of prostitution that takes place. And we also are in a significant problem because not only do we not have the resources, but there are other crimes that are taking place, acts of severe violence that are being perpetrated against young women and children, where that ends up taking the majority of our investigative energies. And so there's an awful lot that we can't address right now, but we are still trying to address a whole host of problems.
So I assume that's a very expensive operation for you to really investigate.
It's a time-consuming process, but the Portland Police has dedicated significant amount of resources for this problem. We have 4 full-time investigators assigned to the Detective Division whose sole purpose is investigating these kinds of exploitation cases. We're also part of a federal task force that includes the FBI as well as Homeland Security and other area law enforcement agencies such as the Vancouver Police Department, Tigard Police, and Beaverton Police Departments. And we work cooperatively so that we can address the issue beyond the borders of Portland.
So how those women become a victim? I mean, what category? How they can happen?
Well, in most circumstances, they get caught up in this type of exploitation without ever having intended to do it. And I think that's what makes people so vulnerable. Most people believe that everybody engaged in this conduct is just consensual behavior, that it's just people who have low moral standards or they don't have a certain kind of boundaries that other people do. They think that these are the people who are willingly getting engaged in this, and the reality is that's not true. In most circumstances, the average age of entry into prostitution is between 13 and 15 years of age. That's the average age of entry. And we have even begun asking adults that we encounter how old were they when they first got caught up in this, and almost all of them will tell us that they began as a teenager. So the way it looks like is exploiters look for a vulnerable population. They look for people who are lost, young people who are runaways, young people who are having difficulties at home. And then what they do is they set themselves up in a position to try and meet their needs. So they get to know them, they pretend to care for them, they pretend to like them, they compliment them. They lead them to believe that this is a caring relationship, and this is all part of what we call the grooming process. They're grooming them, and then they are setting them up in order to move them into this business. The next cycle is what we would call the breaking cycle. It's where they try to break this young person and force them into prostitution. They can do that through a whole variety of means. Oftentimes it's significant violence that's committed against them. Sometimes it's by pressuring them and telling them, I need you to help me make some money. I've been buying you all these gifts. We've been staying in these hotels and traveling around, and we really need the money, and I need you to just do me this one favor. I need you to go over to this hotel, and I want you to go into that room, and I want you to do exactly as that man tells you to do. I just need you to do this for me. And there's a lot of pressure to where this young woman feels like they have to comply. This is the breaking point. If they can get this young person to engage in this first act, they have essentially caused them to step over a line that they never thought they would cross. It's a place that they never thought they would go. But now they have gone through and they have committed this act that they didn't want to, that they didn't think that they would ever do, and that becomes sort of an emotional tipping point for them. The next phase after they have been broken is what we would call the maintenance phase, and this is just to keep them engaged in this business effort for them. And they are forced to engage in these sex acts with total strangers as often as 10 to 15 times a night, every day of the week.
It's basically against their will, but they've been brainwashed and circumstances they really forces them to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Why they're not running away from them? For example, if they see they ended up in that situation, now they realize, can they just call the police for help? Why they don't do it?
They can, but they've been threatened that if they call the police, either they will be harmed or their family will be harmed. And also, I think most of us, if we think about our own children, if we were to think about a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, I think for those of us who have teenagers, we realize that they view the world differently than those of us who are much older. They actually don't understand all of the options that are available to them. And they don't realize that there are some alternatives available to them. They're caught up in this relationship where they're confused. They have had significant trauma inflicted on them. And the way trauma or this sort of emotional pain that's happened to them, they actually don't know how to deal with it. And they're afraid that if they say anything, or they're afraid if they leave this person, either they will be hurt or someone that they love will be hurt. And so they feel trapped in it. Now, these exploiters use a whole variety of methods of control. One of the things that they do is they remove them from all of the areas that are familiar to them. They will take them away from their family, they will move them to a different state or to a different city, and they keep moving them from place to place so that they're not in a place that's familiar to them. They're not around any of their friends, they don't have access to their family or their friends, and so they don't know who to call. They're told that if they report to the police will probably just arrest you. They will lie to them. They will say that we are friends with the police, we know them, so if you call them, they will just simply tell us. And they trick these young people into believing that there is no place for them to go. And for trying to identify what populations are most at risk, I think the ones that are most at risk are the ones who really don't understand their surroundings as well as perhaps those who were born and raised in this country. So when we're talking about the Russian-speaking community or Eastern European or for that matter, any other population who has come here from another country, I think we can examine some certain categories and we can find out, do we think this particular population's at risk? So we would ask ourselves, does this young person come from a country that has a historically bad relationship with the police? And I think that's the case in a great many Eastern European countries, as well as South America, Latin America, various parts of Asia. I think we could say that these regions do not have a historically positive relationship with law enforcement. They view law enforcement as corrupt and unreliable. And in many circumstances, that's exactly true. In many parts of the world, it's law enforcement themselves who are involved in the trafficking. They own the brothels, or they are the ones who are buying their services. So they realize their whole life experience tells them that the police are not a safe place to go. Now add to that, they're unfamiliar with the language and the culture. They don't understand their surroundings. They're in a new environment and they just don't know where to go. This is a particularly vulnerable population because they can be abused and exploited and they won't even really know how to respond to it.
What do you do when you find somebody like that in that condition? Somehow, maybe that person becomes so lucky to get away from that. And do you guys provide some shelters? What do you guys do for such a victim?
Well, the most difficult thing is identifying who they are to begin with. So I think my first message would be one of encouragement. If you know somebody who is caught up in this, or if you yourself are being pressured into engaging in these types of acts, what I would say to you is don't be afraid to come to the police. We're not going to arrest you. What we are going to do is just sit and listen to what you have to tell us and try to identify a way that we can help you. We can get you connected with a great many resources, from counseling to advocacy, medical care. That's my first message. The second thing is we look for people through the course of our normal police activities. We do undercover operations. We have uniformed police officers, particularly out in East Precinct around here. We have some of the most skilled officers anywhere who are experts who are identifying young people who are involved in prostitution activities. One of the first things that we would do is just sit down and have a conversation with them. And we would like to learn as much as possible about them. This is not going to be a frightening thing because we view them as a victim and not a criminal. So we want to build a dialogue with them to try to identify what their needs are, what's happened to them, and come up with some way to help them.
What about our community? There is any cases that you might want to let us know maybe a little if there is somebody from Russian community already been a victim? Because some people might even watch us and listen us and not even believe, because sometimes people in denial.
I know from different investigations that I've been involved in where I have come into contact with young women from Eastern Europe and Russia who were working in the sex trade. But what I will say is we have not been successful in getting our message out to that community that we are a safe place for them to come to. And that's why I think this is so important for us. This is the first time that I'm aware of that any Portland police officer, perhaps Natasha has, but this is the first time anybody from my unit has been able to have a direct conversation with this community about their vulnerabilities and what's happening all around them. And so I look for this as perhaps a starting point for a dialogue, a starting point for a more broader conversation about what's going on and how we can work together to help you. And I think that's the most I could say right now. We would never disclose any particular information about anybody. We wouldn't even really talk about where they were from. My concern for that is we have worked a number of cases involving foreign-born victims, but I would not say publicly where they were from, because my fear is that these communities sometimes are so intertwined that simply by mentioning a place or any information about the case might end up giving away who the person is, and we work very hard to maintain their confidentiality.
For some of us, calling police is the last thing they want to do. And we're here just to explain in what conditions we should call the police, because there is some emergency type situation and there is non-emergency type situation. So would you open up a little bit, about that subject?
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we think of emergency situations, most of us are familiar with 911. Anytime that you believe it's a crime in progress, or if what you're observing is a situation where somebody's life or they could be in danger, or anything that seems like immediate, that's a call to 911. Anytime you think somebody's in any kind of immediate danger, or there is a crime in progress, something that's going on right now, that's the time to call 911. Now, we also have a non-emergency number. It's 503-823-3333, and that number is for all other types of police calls. These can be calls where you think something is very suspicious, or you would just like to talk to a police officer to share some information. That's the number that you would call for that.
How confidential that will be if somebody will call for non-emergency number, for example?
You can ask to be anonymous, and we will respect that. The other thing, too, is if you have some information and you want your name to be anonymous in a police report, or you don't want us to release your information, if you tell us that, then we will work very hard at keeping any of that from being released.
So I understand that you guys are working a lot with different communities as well, not just with the Russian community. How successful your operation are with the other communities, for example?
It's getting much more successful, and the reason I think that's true is because we've had great success with multiple cases involving foreign-born victims whose cases have already been resolved, and we have arrested their traffickers, and they're now serving significant prison terms.
Some of us who is listening and watching us right now, they might be in shock just because they grew up in the small villages like we spoke to Natasha a little bit earlier, and they don't even knew such things exist. And I think it's just because it's a new type of the crime. I mean, that kind of crime exists before, but not maybe in that massive quantity, like not that many people were involved. So what I want to ask is that if you look in the whole country, whole nation of United States, and there's a different states, and there is different culture, right? In different states, some dominates, like say Hispanic, and some Russian or others. What would you say about Oregon, where we are located? What should be aware of in our area?
One of the things that I think we have to be mindful of is there is a significant adult sex industry in Portland, which means there's a great many opportunities for exploiting people. There are more than 100 adult businesses in the city of Portland alone, and that includes strip joints, that includes lingerie modeling clubs, and other types of adult businesses. There is a demand here, and as I said, these are just Portland's ads. These are not any other community, these are Portland's ads. There is a significant demand here. I think part of it is geography as well. When I spoke earlier about methods of control where young women who are being exploited are moved from place to place, one of the reasons that they do that is for control, but other reasons also include demand, and because by moving from place to place, they go where there is the market. But the other thing is to avoid detection by law enforcement. Now, geographically, Portland and Seattle, because they're only about 2.5 hours apart, you have two significant populations that are easy to move back and forth between. So what we're seeing is a lot of traffic up and down the I-5 corridor. So one of the things that makes Portland uniquely vulnerable is our geographic position between Seattle and California. And I-5 ends up creating the perfect route for moving people up and down that freeway, stopping at different population centers to sell these young women.
Definitely, I want you to share a little bit more, whatever you think that will be educational for us. What should we be looking, and maybe how we should approach to our kids? Say, like, if our daughter will come and say, maybe I would like to do some modeling, like, because you mentioned some modeling there, and that word really cut me right away, my attention. I'm not saying all modeling is bad, but I'm saying is this: there is certain things they should be aware of. Would you mind to share that with us?
Oh, yes. For parents, we always worry about our children, but we also want to believe the best of what they might be involved in. One of the things that I would encourage the audience: never say, my child would never do that, because as soon as you say that, your child is going to disappoint you and will do that. That's been my experience. The other thing is don't think that any community, no matter where they're from, no matter what their background is never think for a moment that your community is immune from this. It's happening to every community. It's happening to every ethnic group, every religious group. It's happening in every country. It's happening in every state and every city. And the other thing, too, if you look at it from an exploiter's point of view, they want to target the person who is least likely to tell the police. So it makes sense that the target population are going to be people who have a historically poor relationship with the police. So anybody who fits into that category, I think you automatically are in a vulnerable position.
Basically, they're professionals.
Yes, these are professionals who have become experts at targeting and exploiting and identifying our vulnerable children and young women. So what I would encourage you to do is to pay close attention to what your children are doing. Monitor their cell phones. If they have a cell phone, I would suggest that you have a family plan so that you can identify what telephone numbers they're calling. I would also encourage you to find out who belongs to the phone numbers that show up on the call list, and encourage this dialogue with your children to know who they're talking to and when they're talking to people. Okay. Now, if they are in possession of a cell phone and you don't know where they got it from, you need to have a conversation and ask them where they got that cell phone. If they don't have the means to pay for it themselves, and if you didn't buy it for them, then I would be very concerned about that, and I would recommend you call the Portland Police and ask to talk to me at the Human Trafficking Unit. And I would ask you to call 503-823-0400, which is the number to the Detective Division, and ask for me, and I'll be happy to talk with you about what some possible options are that are available to you. The other thing that I would ask you to pay attention to, does your young person suddenly come into possession of some rather expensive clothing or an expensive purse or something that they wouldn't have had the means to pay for? And you need to ask some follow-up questions about where did they get these items. The other thing too is try to know who they're hanging out with. For me, it's always a red flag when a 14-year-old is dating a 25-year-old. It's just, we want to be very careful about adults exploiting young people. And when young people are associating with people that are well beyond their peer group, then this also places them in danger, because exploiters in most circumstances are several years older than the person that they're exploiting, particularly for those who are in the youngest categories. So get to know who the friends are, know where they are, ask where your children are going, and don't be afraid to follow up with them to find out if they are where they said they were going to be. Now, I'm not suggesting that you give up all trust for your children. What I'm suggesting is that as parents, we have a responsibility to pay attention to our children and to care for them, and part of caring for them and loving them is protecting them. And so our number one obligation as parents is to love and protect our children, and we do that by being involved in their lives, knowing what they're doing, where they are, who they're with, paying attention to them. And so I think one of the ways that will protect your children most, talk to them about this. Let them know that if they receive an anonymous email through their Facebook account who somebody wants to befriend them on their Facebook account, don't accept those friend requests if you don't know who it's coming from. There are a lot of exploiters who are using social networking sites in order to become friends and to begin that conversation with young people where their intended desire is to end up luring them away from their home for the purpose of exploiting them. So it's involvement and it's knowledge and knowing what your kids are doing.
So they're basically looking for them on different places like internet, maybe malls, or like when they go to the parties and places like that, correct?
Yes. Because exploiters are in the malls, they're in the parks, they're in the schools, they're at the transit centers where young people gather on the MAX platform. They are, if you can imagine, everywhere young people hang out, that's where the exploiters are going to be.
So you don't really recognize them right away?
No, not.
But they're just blending in. Could it be somebody young can approach to them because that young is worked for somebody else?
Yes. Not only can it be another young person, it could also be another girl. One of the things that we've been seeing is the pimp or the primary trafficker is starting to use girls that have already been working with him, and now he's forcing them to go out and recruit other girls. So much of the recruiting that's taking place right now is coming from other girls who are caught up in this life as well. So we shouldn't focus just on one particular group that we think is the problem. We have to open up our eyes to broaden the way that we look at it and recognize that the risk can come from all directions.
So there could be not just a boys, maybe, girls, but it could be somebody younger, a boy can approach as well. Yes. So that's even more dangerous. That's why it's very important to have education. I also would like to say that in our community, when we say word sex, it sounds really different than it sounds maybe to you because we're from different culture. The reason I'm saying that is because if we can bring that subject more to the public and we want to educate more parents, I really like that idea to do it, because for me, being a parent, having 3 teenagers in that age category, it's really frightening me to listen. But I'm glad I'm doing everything what you just said. But I want to bring this more to other parents, of course. And our community, like a Slavic family here, we have all the equipment that we need for that. We have studio, we have radio, and we're going to do hopefully some more things and just to reach out more families. And why I'm bringing this all up for you, so I want you to understand how important it is to talk about that, because especially how you describe the steps, because when somebody else will hear word sex trafficking, they might say, oh, we're not in that category. We are not in danger because we live here, nobody kidnap us or anything like that. So that subject not for us. But if we come up with some other maybe terminology to kind of enter to our community, that will really helps a lot.
Do you remember when I used the word exploitation?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The reason I use that word, there's a reason why. Because exploitation is not always prostitution. Exploitation is not always a sex act for money. It is also, unfortunately, pornography and videotaping, and that being used as a means to force young people to do things that they don't want to do. Pornography is, it is unimaginable how large and how much it affects the internet and how great the demand is worldwide. So when we talk about exploitation, it can come in a variety of ways. It can be through being forced to work in adult businesses such as strip clubs or lingerie modeling. It can be pornography. It can be prostitution. It can be any time we think of exploitation, it's going to fit into that category. So it's not just prostitution, it's not just a sex act, it can also include these other areas.
Some particular issues that can be relevant to Slavic immigrant community and other immigrant community is the fact that it can be really prevalent. I'm not saying it's happening, but it may happen, more prevalent to have, though however our agency does not investigate those, but we would love to take any report and forward it to a body that is more appropriate and trained and adequate to investigate any labor exploitation cases. Being an immigrant community, it wouldn't be uncommon to bring family members from motherland to come in a capacity of a caretaker, for example, which I think happens a lot. To aid in any capacity taking care of the home. And not ever getting paid for that. So that's also, though we specifically talk about sexual exploitation, it's important to mention that what's also happening in our community, probably as we're speaking, is a very prevalent labor exploitation of people who come here to serve and don't get proper care or don't get proper wage, or they will get paid for 15-hour long day, would get paid $20, which is pure exploitation of their services, and not to mention on both aspects we're talking about fundamental violation of human rights, like one of the basic categories of our foundation here is. So we would like to urge as well, if you learn or if you're aware of that or have information independently, just to call, even if you want anonymously, and report those things if you see that happening, or if you see for example, a bigger construction company hiring specific immigrant community members and exploit them like long work hour days and maybe not getting fed or have horrible working conditions that are just against all the rules and regulations and get paid poorly. We would like to know about those things as well, because as Sergeant Geiger and I talked about the other day, it wouldn't be uncommon to have labor exploitation be facilitating sexual exploitation in one capacity or another. So we don't, there are some differences, but it wouldn't be uncommon to kind of morph into one or another. So we would like to
Natasha,
get reported.
Don't you think that that labor exploitation, particularly that involves women, most often goes from labor to sexual exploitation?
Absolutely, and that's very common. As we talked earlier, it wouldn't be uncommon to have a young woman come to clean a home to a wealthy family, local family, and they're from the same village, for example, and she wouldn't get paid because she's granted a home and she has a bed or a small room or whatever, and would be just natural, gradual transition to getting sexually exploited. And because she has to be grateful that she has a roof above her head, that she makes $20 a day, which she can maybe monthly send home, and it's more than her family makes. So it's like, $20 versus losing $20. She most likely will not come forward to report that. But and not to mention the very complex issues of victimology and brainwashing and psychological abuse and pure fear. We talked about earlier when you said why does the victim doesn't just leave? Well, it's important to understand that we cannot apply our rationale, like yours and Sergeant Geiger's today, to theirs, because it's impossible to compare. They live in a terror of fear. Their rationale is just disturbed, and they're very damaged, emotionally and psychologically. So for them to apply a healthy rationale, it would be really unrealistic to expect. So if you have a knowledge of a person in that condition, please call us, because we would love to, more than anything, to save that person and hold perpetrators accountable for their behavior. Another things that we would like to mention is Sergeant Geiger talked a lot about local sex trafficking problems. We would like to mention to our Slavic families that be aware of that, that if they're young male, their young sons, reach out for the services that's contributing to exploitation, and they're raising demand, and it's against the law not to mention that. So it's not just to worry about girls becoming victims of it, but it's just raising their sons to be healthy young men, to protect women and not to exploit them. Even by answering the ad and paying $20 for services, it's contributing to exploitation on so many different levels. They may not think that way. They think it's it's just a cool thing to do, but they're actually immensely contributing to exploitation of women and children. Would you agree?
Yeah. I'm so glad Natasha brought that up, because what drives this is the demand. It's because there are people out there who will pay for the services, and I think that is such an important thing for us to recognize, is that we talk a lot about the young women who are involved in this, but one of the things that we don't often talk about are the young men who are actually purchasing these young women, or the young men who grow up not really respecting other women to the point where they believe it's not really that big of a deal to take them and sell them to other people. So I think we have an obligation not just to educate our young girls on how to be safe, but we can also educate our young boys on how to respect, and why it's so important to respect young girls.
Yeah, so. Definitely. We coming back to the basic, because the family is the most important in our lives, and if we don't have a healthy wife and has a healthy husband, then how we continue as life. And definitely what you guys doing, it's just amazing, because as I said, it's a little bit of shocking information you probably can see on my face with some things that you're sharing, and it's just probably very little what you share with us, because you don't want to give us a full dose.
I think what I would like to conclude by is, if you are a victim, if you know somebody who's a victim, or you're concerned about them, please call. And by calling, the police are not going to force you into taking action that you're not prepared to take. If you're the victim of this terrible crime, you can call, and you're under no obligation to engage in the justice system or to go to court, not right away. If you just want to be anonymous and talk to me, that's okay too. We've got resources at the Sexual Assault Resource Center, the Portland Women's Crisis Line. There are a variety of resources we can connect you with, and you can stay anonymous. We will work with you in a way that is most comfortable to you. So I guess my message is the police are safe. Call us if you need our help. We will work with you and try and come up with a way to help you out, but we're not going to force you into something that you're not prepared for.
I would like to say that we believe that trafficking, whether it's for sexual exploitation or labor exploitation, is a modern day slavery, and it's just we cannot allow it to happen in our community. It is our moral responsibility to look out for victims, And that means that you just have to maybe get out of your comfort zone and just call that magic number and let us know what is happening, because it's a public health problem. And we cannot really do this alone. As police officers or any other federal agencies, we will react to a problem. We're trying to do a lot of preventative work. That's why we're here, to educate and raise public awareness. That's all we can do. But community, members of the community live in the community. You have the eyes, the ears, you know more what is going on, especially in a very closed immigrant communities, very close enclaves. We don't necessarily have easy access to interacting with people. But you do, because you live and you breathe that community. So who better than you yourself as a community will recognize and see that something's just not right, that something is wrong, that person has no freedom of movement, or freedom to make a phone call, or freedom to make her own or his own will. Those are huge things that you can do, but just identifying, open your eyes and listen to things as well. And if something is wrong, probably is wrong, and that gut feeling is right feeling. But we can't do this alone as any police agency. We need your help. We need your trust to help us and help victims. So this has to be a partnership. There's no other way. There's no us and you, or there should not be division in addressing this very basic problem of trafficking of human beings. It's just it's unacceptable nowadays. So for us to be successful, we need you as an equal partner in this mission, I would have to say.
Thank you so much again for being here with Slavic Family. We do appreciate it.